Welcome to the Have More Fun podcast. In this episode, I talk with Krista Gilbert about practical ideas to give your kids an awesome childhood, the importance of home, and how to feel content.
So like if it was my husband, I would kiss him for 1 minute, which
feels like you wouldn't think it's a long time, but
no, yeah. It's like he's like, whoa.
Okay, is that your tattoo? Are you going for a tattoo with it?
No.
Make it permanent?
I know. Yeah, no, I'm just not going there. This one time I was feeling so much angst about, my daughter, she was wanting this app and I was so stressed out because all our friends had it, right? And I literally looked in the mirror and I go, you are in charge here. You are the parent. You get to make this decision. It's like I had forgotten that I actually am the parent and I get to make the best decision for my child, regardless of what everyone else is doing.
In 2012, governments around the world started getting serious about happiness. In fact, they developed a new metric for determining the health of a nation. In partnership with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the UN began to do extensive surveys to measure the well-being and happiness levels of people in 155 different countries in an effort to quantify what factors contribute to human flourishing. The result is called the Annual World Happiness Report, and the data gleaned from it helps governments and NGOs improve their policy making and investment decisions. Some key factors that they determined that contribute to happiness are purpose in work, freedom to make choices, life expectancy, social support, home life, and access to clean water. But one surprising finding was that in countries where women are more empowered and have a voice in government, those countries are far less likely to go to war with their neighbors, to be in bad standing with the international community, or to have high rates of crime and violence within their society. A woman's presence is more of an indicator of flourishing and happiness in a country than democracy, religion, or the GDP. Totally fascinating, right? As far as the rankings of happiest nations, not surprisingly, the same 13 countries have dominated the top of the World Happiness Report since it began 6 years ago. Last year, the U.S. came in 13th place behind Israel and just a few notches ahead of Mexico and Brazil. And Denmark continues to rank number 1 or 2 year after year. And once I heard about Denmark and how they consistently dominate the quest for happiness, I went online to my local library and reserved every book they had on Danish culture in a quest to learn their secrets. And one of my favorite books that I picked up was The Year of Living Danishly by Helen Russell. Helen moved from London to rural Denmark, and her book documents her mission to find out just what makes it such a happy place. Each month, she researched a different aspect of the culture, from good design to how a more egalitarian culture and high taxes actually make everyone happier. But there was one practice that she discovered that made me particularly envious of the Danes, and that is the practice of hygge. You've probably seen BuzzFeed articles with the title 5 ways to get hygge because word is spreading quickly about this enviable practice, and the rest of humanity seems to be slowly waking up to what the Danes have been wise enough to know for generations, that having a relaxed, cozy time with friends and family, often with coffee or pastries or beer involved, can be incredibly good for the soul. The term comes from a Norwegian word meaning well-being and first appeared in Danish writing in the 19th century, but Danes insist that the meaning doesn't translate well into other languages. They believe it's a concept that's meant to be experienced and not translated. Hygge is how Danes keep their spirits up, particularly during their notoriously dark winters. It's focused on bringing light, warmth, and friendship into a house and making things cozy and happy. It focuses on taking pleasure from the presence of gentle, soothing things and enjoying being together. Candlelight is a key component of hygge, and Danes burn the highest number of candles per head than anywhere else in the world. In addition to all things cozy, hygge is about togetherness, because you wouldn't have survived a winter in Denmark historically without a little help from family and friends to gather firewood and to pickle all your food. So hygge prioritizes sitting around a table with friends and family while drinking a hot mug of tea, by candlelight, of course. And Helen Russell, author of The Year of Living Danishly, says that hygge isn't just a middle-class thing. Absolutely everyone's at it, from my dustbin man to the mayor, she shares. Hygge is so crucial to living Danishly that the other day on the motorway, I saw a camper van driving along with lit candles in the windows. This is probably illegal, but Vikings don't tend to be too hung up on health and safety, she writes. And the results speak for themselves. The Danes have been named the happiest and most content people year after year, even despite the nominal hours of sunlight in the winter months. And that is why I am so excited for our guest today. Krista Gilbert is an author, blogger, and speaker who lives in the mountains of Idaho with her husband, Eric, and their 4 children. Krista wrote her most recent book, Reclaiming Home, as a reminder of the importance of intentional and life-changing practices that so many of us have forgotten, including the importance of reclaiming time, childhood, and tradition. And so many of her ideas run parallel to the practices that contribute to the highest rates of happiness and contentment in the happiest nations in the world, especially Denmark. And so, without further ado, here is my friend, Krista Gilbert. Okay, I have to talk about your book because it is so lovely and inspiring and all of the things I most need to hear in this season of my life. And you've written totally what I would call a manifesto for reclaiming a sense of home, and home being the most important and influential space that we occupy. So tell me a little bit about where the idea came from.
Well, it came out of my own need, which is how most books are written, I think, is
Totally.
you say, oh my gosh, like I need this. And so it just came out of that feeling that life was spinning out of control a little bit. And sometimes I always think of it like, because I'm a nature girl, so I always think of it like I love rivers. And, you know, you feel like you're in this river and the current has you and you're just headed down and you're trying to swim against the current, but it's really hard and you get tired. And so finally you just like throw up your arms and just start floating with the current. And I think I was just really feeling that way in my own life, that between kids' activities, between technology, between our pace, between work and both my work and my husband's work, I was just feeling like the current was fast and furious, and I had kind of thrown up my hands and was in it. And I just felt like, okay, maybe we don't live on farms anymore. Maybe we don't live like our grandmothers lived. But whether we're in downtown New York or rural Montana, there are some things that we can make sure, these kind of building blocks of our homes, that we can make sure are in place so that our kids are walking away, and us too, are walking away with this sense of family and home that I think past generations had kind of without trying, because they lived a different lifestyle. So even though we live a completely different lifestyle, and most of us are not, you know, moving to farms and going off the grid or homeschooling or whatever, and some of us are homeschooling, and some of us are on farms and doing that too. But it doesn't matter where you are. It's more about we all can incorporate some of these things. And so I really break it down into 12 different chapters, and I tackle 12 different things that we can do to reclaim our homes a little bit and not feeling like we're just going to be swept away in the current.
I grew up in a family where we knew our Nana and Granddad's house was the place that if you ever needed to go home, that's where you went, right? And so every summer, all of our family would come in, and there'd be like 12 different families there at any given time, and taking turns around the dinner table. And it was just this sense of safety and legacy and tradition that was so anchoring that I always want that for my kids. And yet we live such a transient life and have lived in like 12 different houses and have such a different story. So I love the idea of reclaiming a space and calling it home and reviving some of those traditions that we have lost.
Yeah, because our culture isn't the same as it once was. And yet we know the value of that. And for those of us who have been gifted, like you were given a gift of that, right? Not everyone gets to have that.
Absolutely.
But you know what that does in the soul of a person. It's not something you can really put your finger on, but you just say, but it matters so much. It gets to those really deep places of belonging. And I'm a part of something, and I'm safe in the world because I'm a part of this family structure. that is so stable and so good and that is beyond myself. And we can create that, even if you haven't had that. And that was the other reason I wrote the book. I literally had a friend one day who has a very broken past, and everything that could have happened to her did. And she looked at me one day and she grabbed me, literally grabbed my shirt, and with tears streaming down her face, she said, "Show me. Like, you've been given a gift." And I have an amazing legacy. My parents are phenomenal people. I was raised in a home that was very stable, very loving. And yet I didn't get to choose that. I was just born into that. I didn't necessarily deserve that. I didn't deserve that over my friend who didn't have that. And so then when she looked at me and she said, "Show me how to do this thing called family," I just started bawling because I thought, oh my gosh, she's right. I've been given a gift, and I can help others to have hope in their families if they were never given that gift. They can now be that gift for future generations that goes well beyond them into their grandchildren and their grandchildren's children. And they can be the start of that. And that is such hope for people.
Totally. They can create that legacy where people will be talking about them and the gifts that they imparted on generations to come from the choices that they're making now. I love that. So empowering. We talk a lot in our family about how we want our kids to know that home is the safest place in the world, and that they can be completely themselves, and that they will be loved when they are in our home and in our presence. And we also want our friends and family who come to know that our home is a refuge, a haven, a safe place. How do you create a sense of home when you don't know where to start?
Well, I think we need to look at kind of the foundations of home. I think it's just a great place for us to begin. So I talk about 5 different foundations. So the 5 different foundational principles are communication, acceptance, love, presence, and play. And so we can look at those 5 things and say, okay, if I'm going to start somewhere, these are 5 places I can start. So let's take acceptance, because when you were talking, I'm like, okay, really acceptance is kind of at the heart of that, right? If you want people to feel comfortable in your home, they need to feel accepted there, or they're not going to feel comfortable. So what are some ways we can make people feel accepted? Well, I always want to go to the practical of that, because as an idea, we like that, but like, what does that really look like to communicate, I accept you? Well, one of the ways is we can ask people their opinions. We can, and of course this piggybacks on love too, but when they come in, we can look them in the eye, call them by name, and say, here's something that I see in you. You know, here's something that I appreciate about you. When I've got 3 out of my 4 that are teenagers right now, and this is really important with teenagers because you cannot fool them. But it's a good practice, even
they have
like
the best BS detectors of anyone in the whole world, right?
Totally. And so, like, it's super important that that comes from a genuine place, and that you really do like be the one that searches for gold in people, and searches for that thing that you can say, I love the way that when you walk into the room, you always smile, or I love the way that you bring humor, and you know, you're so funny. I just love it. You know, just like being really genuine, but noticing something about them, and that makes them feel loved and accepted. So I think it's just really the words that we use, how we treat people. Sometimes it's just listening. People feel actually accepted when you listen to them. And that's, we don't give that enough credit. But when you ask questions, and I mean, even young kids, when you get eye to eye, you get down on their level, you get eye to eye with them, and you say, what do you think about that story? What do you think about that bug right there? Or tell me about your picture. And you're like engaged and excited. Wow. Like, and that gets into presence. And that's why all of these foundational principles play off each other. That gets into presence too, that presence is actually the art of being fully engaged. So you can be present in a room and not present.
Totally.
And so, you know, when we're in a space with someone, are we fully engaged, or are we just kind of going through the motions? And then we can look at communication. You may be a really different communicator than someone in your home, and that can cause a rift. but look for ways that you can bridge that gap. Look for, you can, in fact, that's something I love to do is when my kids get to an appropriate age where they can actually take like an Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or something, I do that with them because what that does is that gives us a jumping off point for communication. So I can say, I know this kind of about your number 7, and I know you don't like to talk about hard things, but can we talk about this hard thing? Because this is kind of something going on. I mean, what a great, and with your spouse.
Oh, that's huge.
To know like, okay, so I know that this is a hard communication piece for you, but can we just like acknowledge that and then open it up, right? So just really working toward health in that area. And then also of course, the nonverbals often are, what is it? Like 90% or 80% of communication is nonverbal. And tone, oh my gosh, can we talk about tone for a second as women? I'll just speak for myself. My tone is terrible sometimes with my husband. And so, am I watching my tone? Because tone in my communication is going to determine how people receive that. It's not the words necessarily, it's how I am saying them. So we could kind of start at some of these like foundational pieces.
I love that. There was a sentence in your book that really struck me, and you talk about family stories, and you say that we live in an era where children know more about their electronic devices than their own family history. Why is knowing our family history so important?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when we go to 30,000 feet, right? So you look at the big picture and you think that we're a piece of this giant family puzzle and we're only a piece of it. And just like you were saying earlier, it is actually really important that we're not the only piece in the puzzle. Because ultimately, even though that feels good to be self-centered for a time or to be just like, just one piece of it, ultimately it won't provide that same stability and support that entire puzzle will create. It's like beauty when you're doing a puzzle and you're like putting it together and it looks all mishmash, but then like when it's done, you're like, oh, this is amazing. This is so awesome to see this all come together and how it all fits. And that really is the same thing with our families, that we gain so much from being connected to these other pieces of the puzzle. I mean, I look at, for example, my sister. My sister brings out a part of me that nobody else in the world brings out. There's just a way, when she's around, there's a certain aspect of me that comes out. And I remember reading something about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. And I forget who the third guy was. But anyway, but they were saying that when one of them passed away, one of their great sadnesses was that there would be no one to draw that part of them out anymore. Because that relationship was so special that it drew out something really unique. And that really is part of the beauty of this larger family story, is that each person draws out these pieces of us that wouldn't be drawn out otherwise, and also connects us to this web of identity and belonging. I mean, belonging is one of the most important places because kids will find it somewhere. If they don't find it in your family, they will go looking. I mean, I was a high school teacher, and if I could boil down all the issues with my students, it was belonging. They had such a need to belong somewhere. Well, we want to be the ones to give that to our kids. We want our family, sure, they're still going to seek it out in their peer group, okay. But if they know without a shadow of a doubt they belong in this larger family structure, that kind of stability will allow them to make better decisions in their peer group as they seek out that belonging in a peer group.
So smart. I was reading a study recently. I've been really looking at what helps kids to thrive into adulthood. So what we can do as parents now that will serve them well as adults. And two things kept coming up over and over and over again. And one of them I didn't want to be true, but it is. And it's the number one thing. And that is eating dinner around a table 4 or more times a week helps kids thrive in ways that not doing that doesn't. But the second thing was when kids know their family stories, they have a sense of empowerment. And it's not just the good family stories, it's the bad ones too. So they need to know, okay, Uncle Jim was in jail, or our family lost a business that we had, because what that instills in them is that, oh my gosh, my family went through these hard things and we're okay. And so if I go through hard things, I'm going to make it through as well. And so it was just really remarkable to me that that was the second most important thing to help kids flourish as adults, is to know their family stories.
I could not agree more. And I think it's that resilience piece that's in there too, that when we know that other people in our line have been resilient, we know we can be resilient too. And one of the ways that I've done this, and I think this is just a great thing to do with any family. So my siblings and I do homemade gifts for Christmas gifts every year.
Such a great idea.
Which,
is it more stressful or less? I'm not sure.
Depends on how on top of things I am. It's more if I know my plan, I'm good. But anyway, one of the gifts that I did for my siblings was I interviewed my parents at our family's lake cabin, which my grandpa built with his own hands in 1957. And on that dock, I sat my parents down and I just interviewed them. And then I put it on a DVD for my siblings for Christmas.
A remarkable
and
gift.
YouTube or whatever, but I wanted it in a couple different places, and I thought, we had all the kids sit down and watch it, but that was exactly what we talked about. We didn't just talk about the good things. We talked about the hard things, and we talked about, what it was like for them growing up. And, my grandparents lived through the Depression. My grandpa was in World War II and didn't see my dad for 3 years.
Wow.
And just all of these things this is important. It's important that our kids know what life was like and what history they come from. And that is all a part of building who they are. So, ways that we can do that, I think just making sure we often don't take time for our kids to spend that concentrated amount of time with grandparents or with aunts and uncles or with great aunts and uncles, or and just the art of kind of sitting around the family table. Getting back to what you were just saying, I think those can be connected.
Mm-hmm.
Kids used to have to sit around dinner tables every Sunday. Like when my parents were growing up, that's what they did, pot roast Sunday. And, the whole family came and they sat around and talked, and you kind of just learned by everyone talking. Well, we don't do that anymore. That's not really a thing anymore in most families. So we're going to have to be intentional to create that space and to teach our kids. And granted, we got to let go of this idea of perfection, because it's going to be disastrous half the time, and it's not going to look the way we want.
Everybody's going to be fidgeting. And
it's not going to be ideal. Yeah. And we got to, for me, that's one of my hardest things, is I have these ideals of how I want things to look, and then reality butts up against that. And that's such a bummer. But we have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable sometimes to make it happen.
Awesome. Okay, so you had this idea that you challenged families to find meaning in a minute. Tell me about that.
Okay. Well, I have a whole website called Meaning in a Minute, which is actually where that little phrase comes from. But it was born out of the idea. One of my life mottos is something is better than nothing. And it really is.
That's so freeing.
It really is. It's like, okay, if I only can do 20 minutes of exercise, that's better than nothing. Or 5 minutes, it's better than none, right? So I kind of came up with this idea that I felt like I was going through my days and I was doing so much for everyone, but I wasn't really connecting with them. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to do an experiment, and I'm going to spend just 1 minute a day focused on this one thing. So if it was my husband, I would kiss him for 1 minute, which
feels like you wouldn't think it's a long time, but
no, it's like, he's like, whoa, woohoo, And then I decided, okay, I'm going to, actually look my child in the eye or give a back rub, and for 1 minute, and just see what kind of connection happens. And it was amazing. The difference.
In 1 minute.
In 1 minute.
Wow.
So then I'm like, okay, there is something to this, but I think what it does is it trains our brains to be more intentional, right? So all of a sudden you're like, okay, if my husband is the focus today, all of a sudden, my intentionality has just been raised, and now I'm going to treat him differently. And that's really all it takes.
And it's such a small, doable step, right? 1 minute.
Right. Everybody has a minute. I mean, come on. We scroll through social media lots of minutes a day. We have 1 minute that we can give. And I think, too, it just frees people up to say, okay, maybe I don't have a half an hour that I can do this, but I could take 1 minute and go leave a note on my child's pillow. I could take 1 minute and write with Expo marker on their mirror, you know? I mean, it really is sometimes just a minute, but like how awesome for kids to feel cared about in that one little thing.
Love it.
Yeah.
What's your website if people are interested?
So it's just meanininaminute.com. And I have one for teachers too.
So smart.
Because I mean, I think I have a heart for teachers because I was one, but you know, it like even just like how to connect with students in a minute, or I have one on gratitude, you know, even cultivating our own souls. Just, you know, these little things that we can do. And it's amazing because when we get more aware of a certain area, we start paying attention to that and then we tend to it better.
So good. Okay, I have a question about home and creating home. And what would you tell us? We are living in a world where it's trying to convince us we need more, right? More shiplap, more space, more. And so how do you create a sense of contentment, not only with the home you have, but also just a sense of contentment in your own heart and with your kids and your husband? What's your trick?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so true. And I am a Pinterest lover. I mean, some people hate Pinterest because of like but I think there is kind of a dark side, right, of the whole Pinterest culture, that things have to look a certain way and be a certain way. And we do have these ideals, and that really plays against us because what that does is it leads us down the path of comparison. And comparison will never get us anywhere, and it certainly won't bring us joy. So whatever side of comparison we're on, I think there's two sides. One is where you're kind of above other people. Well, that just, you know, it's a judgmental, prideful place to be. But then one is where you're under people, and then that is a really bad place to be because then you get jealous, and jealousy is a killer and it's a destroyer. And so there's either side of this coin it's bad. And so we have to figure out how we don't go there and what we can do. And for me, one of the things I've been studying lately is soul care. And what is it really to take care of our souls? What does that mean, really? And one of the things that I've read about and that I've been practicing in my own life is just really training your mind. So neurologically, what happens is when a situation occurs, we react out of the lower part of the brain. So this is even neuroscience, which I think is actually interesting to know about.
I'm all about it.
Is we just react, right? But the prefrontal cortex is actually the place where judgment and compassion and empathy and reasoning lives. So the sooner we can jump feelings, jump situation into the prefrontal cortex, the better we're going to be, because we're going to make better decisions that are based on truth. And as a person of faith, that's really important to me because I want to base my decisions based on truth. And so, well, how do we do that? Well, we can't be so busy that we're not taking time to think, first of all. And so if we're going to use that thinking part of the brain, we need to give ourselves some space to do that, and that's a part of soul care. So, you know, for me, what that means is that I have to have some space in my day where I'm writing things down. For me, for whatever reason, I can't just sit and think. I need to get it down and start writing, and for me, that's a way to really work things out. And so this is all, you know, wrapped up. And then also, as a person of faith, it's important for me to incorporate Christ into that scenario. And so in that time of soul care, I bring in Christ. I transfer what I'm feeling to that prefrontal cortex so I can be a better thinker about it. And then what I do is I commit it to prayer and I start naming gratitude, which I feel like it's such a, it's something that's been around a while. It's kind of this, you know, buzz of like gratitude journals and be grateful and, you know, but it really does change you. And it really does transform your perspective. And so it gets a lot of hype, but I would just say like, don't undervalue it because it does get a lot of hype, that there's a connection between all these things. When we are grateful and our perspective shifts on our situation, then all of a sudden our contentment grows, right? So I'm a gardener, and here's what I know about gardening. I can work, but if my soil is not good, nothing is going to grow. So what do I have to do first? I have to tend that soil. I have to make sure I put fertilizer in it. I have to make sure that there's good things in that soil. Well, when it comes to our contentment, the good things of the soil are what I was just naming, that gratitude piece, the quiet piece. For me, getting out in nature is a part of that. I am a more content person when I slow down enough to get out in God's creation.
Do you have a favorite trail that you walk on, or what's your nature of choice?
Yeah, I do. It's wherever I've lived and I live in an area now where it's really easy to access. But even in other places like cities that I've lived, I've always kind of found my spaces. So whether that was a park or it was a certain trail in the middle of the city, which most cities are actually pretty good about city planning, and they try and have green spaces, I found my places and I would get out in it. And it really is incredible. And I also would say movement. So one of the things I learned recently was that for trauma therapy, they actually have patients do balls in both hands, and they have them squeeze them in a rhythmic pattern so that they can use both sides of the brain to process their trauma.
Is it like REMD? Or using sound on different sides?
Very similar. I mean, it's probably
Yeah.
a similar concept. But what's incredible is that the body mimics that when you are out walking. I mean, isn't that cool that God created the body that way? So when you're out walking, you're in a rhythm, you're in that rhythmic pace, and you're also accessing both sides of your brain, which is why I do my best thinking when I'm out, like taking walks. Well, there's a reason, God created the brain and the body to kind of go together. And so, again, getting back to contentment, I think all of those things help. And it's choosing not to focus on the negative. It's choosing. One of the things that my friend Elisa Keaton said the other day that I thought was so amazing, she said it in a podcast, was that when, in John 10:10, when it says Satan comes to steal and kill and destroy, but God comes to give us abundant life. But one of the ways that can happen, that killing and destroying, is by getting us to dramatize our own pain and to stay there in that really negative space. Wow. And I thought, that is profound because it's true. When we just spin around that negative thing or what we don't have or that we don't measure up, or I'm not like her and I don't look like her and I don't have what she has, right? That comparison again. Yep. But that's usually where it stems from. When we dwell in that negative, it robs us of life over and over and over again. And that's not what God wants for us. It's not what He has so much more for us than that.
So good. Okay, my favorite question that I love to ask everyone is, what is the best advice you never got?
One of my pastors said something one day that I loved, and we were out to lunch, and I ran into he and his wife, and I'm like, hey, look at you guys, middle of the day out to lunch. Aren't you just something? And he said, hey, Krista, you got to enjoy the journey, right? And it's the simplest thing.
Totally.
But it's one of the things that I say all the time to myself. You got to enjoy the journey, right? What's this for? If we're just going through life, with our head down, work, just our entire, and we're not enjoying what God gave us, this life that He gave us, that actually is waiting for us to pick up our head and enjoy. And I thought, okay, this is the simplest thing. And it's kind of a, just this phrase that everybody says, but it just hit me in a certain way. And it's something I probably say to myself 3 times a week. Enjoy the journey. Just enjoy it.
Okay, is that your tattoo? Are you going for a tattoo with it?
No.
Make it
I
permanent?
know. Yeah, no, I would just not do going there.
So good, though. I love that. Such an
Mm-hmm.
important message that I need to remind myself of daily.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you have, just to kind of wrap up, do you have 3 super practical tips for reclaiming home?
Okay. So I will say that one of the things that I think has been the most transformational thing in our house with our kids has been when they were young, we started this thing called nights, where every kid had a different night. So, for one, it was Monday, the next one, it was Tuesday, and they got to stay up for like 20 minutes extra and just play a game or help bake cookies, whatever it was, right? It was just
one kid at a time.
One kid at a time, which, I just find a lot of my frustration when my kids were young was the refereeing, the fighting over the toy, the managing the chaos. But when you take everybody else out and you just have one, you're able to, let's get back to the enjoy word, you're able to really enjoy them just as an individual and not have all the other dynamics going on. So how that's transferred in my kids' older years is we now do weekends with our kids with just one of our kids. And sometimes it's just my husband, sometimes it's just me. But my daughter went off to college this past fall, and as kind of a last hurrah, we did, this weekend with her at Cannon Beach, Oregon, and it was just as amazing and powerful as when she was younger.
Aww.
I mean, it was so special. It was like precious, precious time that I will treasure forever that we had with her, just these like memories and moments. And that was all because we just singled her out and just took her. And so I would say that's like one of my biggest things is find ways to really connect with your kids one-on-one. And whether that be it's just 20 minutes on their night, or you actually take a whole weekend, or we also have taken our kids to camps, like parent-child camps, where it's like a week-long adventure camp, super bonding experience called JH Ranch. But, prioritizing that in the schedule. So that would be one.
One kid, couple minutes, little bit late at night.
Yeah.
And I feel like late at night is kind of when the magic happens.
Yes.
Like when their guard comes down and they might share something that they don't normally do during the hustle and bustle of the day.
Totally.
So I love that idea.
And I would say another thing is connecting kids to a faith community of some kind. For us, so there's 2 things I think that have made the biggest difference in our parenting. One is something that we've done, which is that one-on-one time. But the second one is this camp that our kids have gone to. And it's called Camp Spalding. It's a Christian camp in our area.
Iowa?
It's in Idaho.
Idaho.
I'm sorry. It's in Washington. It's just across the border from Idaho. It's this amazing place that has a great staff of college kids, young kids who are living out their faith. And this place, so the combination of no media, being outside, adventuring, doing things, that they do at camp, the fellowship that they experience, and then these kids who are incredible role models of young people who are hip, who wear, they're hip, they're awesome, they wear the clothes or whatever that the teenager, are wearing, and yet they love Jesus. And it has, at kind of when we've hit the rough patches, and we have hit them, when we have hit the rough patches, one of the greatest anchors for my kids has been this place. And my kids are really different. And most parents can say that, that their kids mine just tend to be on these polar opposites. But it doesn't matter where they are. Every single one of them has been deeply impacted by this place. So for us, that was a Christian camp. But you can find that in a neighborhood with your, a small group of people. You can find that in your church. You can find that in your MOPS group, with the MOPS communities and the families, and being more intentional about getting together outside of the MOPS meetings, but kind of creating these safe spaces and places, because so much of life for our kids growing up is not safe. It's not. Their phones aren't even safe.
Right.
And so we have to really work to create these safe places for them. And, for us, that happened to be a Christian camp, but it really could look a lot of ways.
So good. I love it. And third tip.
Okay. The third tip, I would say, kind of goes along with what we were just talking about with the soul care, but it is doing self-evaluation. So, you know how you get in this like pattern in your house where everyone does the same things week after week, day after day? We really don't take time to like evaluate, is this where I want to be?
Wow.
Is this what I want to be doing? Is this what I want our family to look like? I remember I did this one time and it was such a like sad thing for me because I'm like, the culture of our home right now is really not good. Like this
you
is
have a moment where it's like, oh my gosh, this is not okay.
Yeah, like this is really not where I want it to be. Like I'm pretty sad about the culture of our home right now. But what I did with that is, again, not staying in that negative place, but like, okay, I'm not happy with it. So what are some things that we could do to change that right now? Okay, I could start doing couch time with my husband again, right? Where we're like on the couch, 15 minutes to a half an hour every day. Okay.
No phones?
No phones.
Just like,
just
are you watching
him
TV
and I.
or
Nope.
just chatting?
Nope.
Okay.
We're just literally on the couch facing each other. I call it keeping current. So it's just keeping current. Like, it doesn't really matter what we talk about. We're just staying current on each other's lives, like actually letting each other in to kind of that everyday space. And so that would be one way to like change a marriage culture, but also how much are we letting electronics dominate our lives? So how much are the computers out? How much are the phones out? How much, and again, like I said, I have teenagers, whereas, the MOPS audience is not quite there, but still kids are asking for iPads at,
absolutely.
From basically the time they're able to like say, reach for it.
My 3-year-old nephew is way more adept at the phone than I am.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, we really have to monitor that stuff because quickly our culture can be one of everyone just does their own thing. Everyone is just on their devices or off doing their own thing. Now, granted, there's, an appropriate time for that. And it's not bad. I'm not one of those that says technologies. I love technology. But when I don't like the culture of our home, it usually comes back to us being disconnected and not really having those experiences that are bonding us and creating that unity. So take time to self-evaluate that, and that would be my tip is really, even if it's just once a year, just have that where you go, okay, with your spouse or by yourself, just say, where are we at and where am I at personally and where do I want to go? Because every ship needs a good captain. And if you don't have a good captain, you are not going to make the journey. And so we are the captains of our ships and we get to say, nope, I'm the parent and we're going to go this way. And this is our course. I am setting our course and we're going. And so that's an important exercise and that we often don't take time to do.
What an empowering message to say. You're in control of the culture of your home, the activities you choose, the pace, and to say you can change any of it at any given moment. You can say no, you can say yes.
Yeah, I'll never forget. This one time I was feeling so much angst about, my daughter, she was wanting this app and I was so stressed out because all our friends had it, right? And I literally looked in the mirror and I go, you are in charge here. You are the parent. You get to make this decision. Like, it's like I had forgotten that I actually am the parent and I get to make the best decision for my child, regardless of what everyone else is doing. Like we get to do that and we forget that.
We do. Why is that?
I don't.
I forget it on a daily basis.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I do have a choice here.
Right.
I do have a say.
Exactly.
Yeah. Such a good message. Thank you for writing this book. It is brilliant and truly a manifesto for all of us women who are striving to create a place that our kids will want to come back to when they're older and that they will take in their hearts wherever they go.
Well, thank you for having me, Mandy. I love being here.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. It would mean the world to me if you would take a minute to rate and write a review of this podcast. And make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Sunshine, blue skies. I gotta cry. I'm really supposed to cry. Listen.